The man's gaze behind his dark glasses seemed to bore into the phone screen. Every second he waited for the courier seemed unbearably long. He found it difficult to understand how a typical delivery from a Chinese restaurant could take a full hour. He blamed this on today's carefree youth. They didn't know how to value time and didn't understand the seriousness of the delivery mission entrusted to them. The man rose abruptly from his chair, arguing that everyone around him was merely faking their work. But if everyone started acting professionally and to the best of their abilities, the lives of those around them would change for the better. His powerful hand gripped the handle of the bat with such force that the tense tendons showed through the skin like steel cables. In the depths of the room was the victim, like a sinister puppet, hanging upside down, its movements restricted by tight bonds. The man with the bat looked with disdain at the maze of knots, ready to strike professionally at any second. The victim tried to say something, but only an indistinct moan could be heard. In a desperate attempt to save himself from imminent death, the man writhed his entire body, feeling the whistle of a deadly weapon ready at any second to turn his bones into crumbs. The victim's face was frozen in primal horror and despair at the realization of the inevitable pain. But the executioner was ordered to beat the victim thoroughly before death. A split second before the first strike of the bat, the figure of a courier in a bright orange jumpsuit appeared in the dim light of the lamps cutting through the darkness of the industrial ruins. Like salvation. The man in dark glasses merely glanced lazily, as if assessing whether this courier was worthy of his attention. But his appearance made me think for a second. There were people down at the entrance who weren't supposed to let anyone in. This guy simply wasn't supposed to get through. The courier slowly turned his head, like a predator scanning the area. His gaze, from beneath the impenetrable glass of his visor, slid across the corners of the room, as if scanning it. One sharp movement, and he was on one knee, fully prepared. The box in his hands became an extension of his body, and his gaze slid from under his visor over potential enemies. In the dim light of the abandoned building, his bright red jumpsuit flared like a warning signal. He dropped to one knee and yanked open the drawer, the clanking of metal echoing in the silence. With a measured movement, he glanced around the room, counting those present, and in this gesture one could see a readiness to break into an attack at any moment. Fingers in thick gloves accurately tapped out numbers on the phone screen as it methodically multiplied the number of victims by the night rate coefficient, turning human lives into dry zeros and ones on the display. The man with the bat was utterly outraged by the courier's impudence. His face twisted in a grimace of rage. His hand darted forward like a lightning bolt, and he asked dryly, "What do you want here?" The courier's voice, muffled and hard from under the visor, cut the air like a blade. "I need a fight." He needed to beat them all up now, but it was just a job. There was not a drop of personal hatred in his actions, only a desire to make money. The man in the white jacket barely raised an eyebrow, and this indifferent gesture made it clear that the courier's words were complete nonsense to him. He gave orders to his men to destroy this impudent courier. The guy in the orange jumpsuit pushed his metal box away from himself with one movement of his foot. He was thrown from his place by the crushing blow, turning into a deadly projectile that rushed straight at the enemy's head, leaving him no chance to dodge. But suddenly, an ominous silhouette appeared from the darkness behind the courier, and a knife blade aimed at him flashed in the dim light. His palm, as if forged from steel, tightly intercepted the raised hand with the blade, stopping the deadly movement a millimeter from the target. Another moment and his fist, like a bolt of lightning, tore through the air, falling on his opponent with enormous force. The enemy's body was thrown into the air by the crushing blow. The enemy flew across the entire hall over the heads of the others like a tennis ball, and then he landed heavily against the wall, turning into a motionless dark outline against the cold light. The courier was in a hurry and needed to go to the next call, so he suggested that the opponents attack all at once. The man in the white jacket froze on the verge of shock and rage, unable to believe what was happening. He had no choice but to watch the furious beating of his comrades. The silent figure of the courier in his orange jumpsuit loomed beneath the cold light of the lantern. His commanding grip transformed this moment into an irrefutable death sentence for the vanquished enemy. The man in dark glasses started screaming and drooling as he tried to find out who was in front of him and how much he was paid. He wanted to get this information at any cost and offered twice the amount. But in response, a black-gloved fist delivered a lightning-fast and crushing blow straight to the ear. The courier had no intention of agreeing to such a generous offer, as it would violate his terms of service. He crouched down and loomed over his fallen enemy like a merciless judge. Now it's time to take a report on the work done. In the selfie, the courier coldly displayed his sign of triumph. Once the photo evidence was sent, it was time to look at the next order. The courier was about to leave, but suddenly he heard the indistinct moaning of the prisoner behind him, who was trying with all his might to shout to him. His desire was so strong that he was able to free himself from the gag and screamed in despair after the departing figure in the orange jumpsuit. He was sure that the courier had come to save him and asked him to untie him as quickly as possible before his head burst. The courier was in no hurry to fulfill his request and silently looked through the dark glass of the visor. After checking the order, he said dryly that rescuing this prisoner was not included in his order. This news shocked him. Hanging with his pockets up, the man begged not to leave him there, but his pleas meant nothing to the courier. Turning around, he silently pressed a card into the courier's teeth. Everything that was happening was just work for the courier and required an official request. So, in the teeth of the tied-up prisoner, there was a business card from Lee San from Heaven Delivery. Raising his visor, he announced that if it involved a fight, he was ready to take on any job, since, so far, they were paying well for it. A notification about a new order appeared on his phone screen. Lee San confirmed it, knowing that he had to fight. And get paid well for it. It's been about 2 years since he started working like this, and Lee San was incomparably good at his job. Compared to other high school students, he earned quite a lot. Lee Sang had one dream, and he worked to save up for it. His cherished goal was to buy an apartment in a Seoul high-rise before he turned 20. He visited the site again and was upset to realize that the coveted square meters had gone up in price again. At that moment, a new notification from the bank arrived about a replenishment of the account from the Heaven Delivery. But even at this rate, it would be very difficult for Lee Sang to save up. And orders had been tight lately, and he wasn't happy with the prospect. He even began to think about changing jobs. Lee Sang really wanted money to literally fall from the sky on him. Suddenly, out of the corner of his ear, he heard someone else's conversation. 3 hooligans were harassing a girl. One of them pushed her, and she fell to the floor. They joked that the fattest of them hit the poor thing like a truck. The girl looked at her offenders with a piercing gaze full of hatred. The fat man, seeing this, became enraged and began to attack her even more. He wanted to kick the unfortunate woman sitting on the floor so that she would finally face reality. The scoundrel knew that the girl's father had died, leaving behind a pile of debts. Using this information, he wanted to force her to become his girlfriend, and he even offered her money for it, which disgusted her even more. Suddenly, someone called out to the scoundrels. It was Lee San. Standing next to the girl, he ordered those bastards to apologize to her. The fat man did not expect such impudence, and these words simply infuriated him. His friend tried to reason with him and stop him with all his might, because he knew perfectly well that he couldn't mess with Lee San. After all, he was new and didn't yet know that even his elders tried not to spoil their relationship with Lee San. He quietly advised him to apologize to him, at least for show. But the fat man grimaced in displeasure, because he had no intention of apologizing to anyone. Pushing his comrade aside, he headed straight towards his opponent, asking as he went if he was this girl's boyfriend. But Lee San just looked at him silently, not bothering himself with unnecessary conversations with no one knew who. Suddenly, a small knife flashed in the fat man's hands. He was furious and threatened to make Lee San lose his eyes. But before the fat man could finish speaking, he received a blow to the back of the head from his comrade. The friends grabbed the newcomer by the arms and hurried to lead him away, shouting apologies to Lee San along the way. But he didn't wait for their apologies because it wasn't in front of him that this should have been done. Lee San silently tossed his business card to the girl. If she ever needed help again, she just had to contact him, because for money, he was ready to beat up anyone for her. But if the girl was really short of money, then he was ready to give her a small discount. So she was left sitting alone in the middle of the deserted school corridor. and she clutched this strange business card in her hands. At that moment, a good idea came to her mind. Life at school went on as usual, and the students were already going home after finishing all their work. But at this time, Lisa did not take his eyes off the screen of his phone, as if hypnotizing it. He couldn't get through to the right number, but yesterday he connected 2 orders, and it was really cool. Lee-san sat pensively against the backdrop of the majestic city skyline, contemplating the golden sunset and thinking about how difficult it was to make money. He gazed at the majestic skyscrapers of the metropolis, shrouded in the golden glow of the sunset. But in none of them did the courier have his own home, and these thoughts greatly depressed him. After an endless wait, the phone came to life with a response from Heaven Delivery, and at that moment the screen displayed information about the new order. The first thing Lee-san did was look at the delivery address. He couldn't believe his eyes. The new point was a high-rise building in Gangnam. It was so tall that Lee-san couldn't even see the top of it. This order was very interesting to him because he always wanted to know what was inside this high-rise building. With a habitual movement of his hand, he zipped up his orange jumpsuit. He placed his black helmet on his head, and he pulled protective gloves onto his hands. For the first time in a long time, he felt motivated. Lowering his dark visor, he was determined to make more money. Lee-san slowly climbed up to the desired floor of the skyscraper. He found the penthouse he needed using the number on the wall. Looking at the surroundings, the courier could not understand how a person living in such a place could end up in debt. He pressed the door handle, and it swung open with ease. Stepping into the doorway, Lee-san shouted into the darkness, "Delivery!" But there was silence in response, and he had to take out his phone to somehow light his way. The courier pointed the bright light of his flashlight into the depths of the room. The first thing that the bright beam snatched from the darkness was a flower in a large floor pot. Lee-san decided to run the flashlight around the entire room and noticed that there were strange pieces of paper stuck everywhere. But to see them better in the dark, he had to take off his helmet. The courier adjusted his hair with his hand and walked deeper into the room. And at that moment, like silent shadows, several people followed him. They lurked in the darkness, ready to strike at any moment. One of the strangers had already raised his bat over the head of the intended victim. But the next second, everything changed, and the courier's hand in a black glove delivered a precise, crushing blow to the stranger's face. The sharp hook sent him flying across the room. This situation was a little strange for Lee-san. He already knew for sure that he wasn't alone here. But these guys didn't look like local residents. The courier took out his phone, lamenting that the number of people had been indicated incorrectly again, and he would have to recalculate the extra payment. The men in black suits clearly weren't expecting to see this boy here, but they already understood that he was no ordinary guy. They weren't going to give him the slightest chance, and planned to knock him out right away. But Lee-san seemed to have anticipated their plans in advance, and again struck right on target. And without looking up from his phone screen, he simultaneously counted the number of victims for additional payment. One of the strangers could not tolerate such insolence from some youth. In a fit of rage, he swung the axe behind Lee-san's back, but the courier's precise blow into the darkness knocked the weapon out of his hand. This precision could have amazed anyone, because he was still staring intently at the screen of his phone. But at the same time, he knocked out one opponent after another. Suddenly, a metal table appeared in the courier's hand, and his muscles tensed like steel cables. He brought the structure down on the heads of potential enemies, and the glass tabletop shattered into dozens of pieces that glittered in the darkness. So Lee-san already counted 5 people for additional payment. The next kick sent them flying into the next room, but suddenly someone's arms wrapped around Lee-san like a steel embrace. The opponent was clearly from a different weight class and wanted to overwhelm the courier with his brute force. But he didn't take one thing into account. Lee-san's agility was astonishing. He was able to twist the bones of his arms to grab his opponent. After all, for him, a man attacking from behind was disgusting. At that moment, the thug howled in pain, tearing apart the darkness of the room with his scream. Lee-san clearly saw that there was another person lurking in the darkness. Turning to him, the courier asked why he wasn't approaching, and whether he was really waiting for him to approach him. The enemy could not tolerate such impudence and went on the attack, tightly clutching the knife in his hand. So far, the apartment door with the sign 8001 did not reveal what was happening behind it, but a second later its surface was deformed by the force of the impact from the inside. At this moment, Lee San finished killing his 7th victim. The man's head hung, as if in a silent bow. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed that there was another enemy. His fist was already aimed towards the potential enemy, but the next moment, Lee San looked up and was taken aback. His fist stopped a centimeter from the face of that same girl from school. He certainly didn't expect to see her here, and asked what she was doing here. Her counter-question about what he himself thought took him by surprise. Taking out her phone and showing the screen, the girl quietly said that it was she who called him. It turned out that professional assassins were sent after her, so they could not have been ordinary opponents. But Lee San was able to neutralize them all without even killing them, so he was definitely a good fit for her. These words greatly puzzled the courier, and his facial expression betrayed tension. The girl turned decisively in his direction, and she invited Lee San to work with her. Now her situation was quite dangerous, and she offered to officially hire his strength. The girl promised that the work would not be much different from what he had been doing before. But Lee San arrogantly told her that he did not work permanently, since it was contrary to his work policy. Especially since he'd heard from that fat guy at school that the girl had gone bankrupt. And she should have first thought about how she was going to pay for the delivery. But in response, the girl dryly asked if cash would be acceptable for payment. Lee San really didn't want to deal with cash and irritably told her to pay him back somehow. But he warned that, taking into account the additional payments, the amount had increased significantly compared to the original. But he had no intention of bargaining or giving a discount. After his words, the first wad of money flew to the floor, and then the second, the third. The packs fell at his feet like snow. He was owed 100 million for one deal. Lee San couldn't believe his eyes. The girl made it clear that they could work on mutually beneficial terms. Their interests coincided, and that was all that mattered at the moment. Lee San silently squatted down and picked up an armful of cash. The realization that he was holding 100 million in his hands made sweat appear on his face. The girl realized that now her proposal had definitely interested him. The courier looked up at her confused, and she asked him for the last time whether he was in the case or not. It was night outside, and only the streetlights created ominous shadows everywhere. Despite the late hour, Lee San hurried to the exchange office. He clutched a single tattered bill in his hand. He brought it to the ATM without any enthusiasm, and he slowly lowered the paper into the bill acceptor. The ATM has a metal flap and began to recognize the banknote. Once the procedure was completed, the ATM screen lit up with a bright light. Without any emotion, Lee San began to read the information on the screen. The ATM asked me to confirm the deposit of 50,000 won into my account. This left the couriers in real shock. He couldn't believe his eyes. He was overwhelmed with emotions and wanted to burst into tears from hopelessness. After all, just 2 hours ago, that girl asked him if he was in. And Lee San silently sorted through the bundles of money. He didn't answer her for a long time, maintaining some kind of incomprehensible pause. And then he dryly said that he agreed. Leaning on his knee, the courier slowly rose from the floor, and the next moment he kicked the wads of money, and they scattered like autumn leaves. With a haughty expression, he asked if she really thought she'd answer her like that. The girl watched out of the corner of her eye as her money flew all over the room. Lee San grabbed one of the bills on the fly. He began to shove this piece of paper in the girl's face with contempt, claiming that this money was counterfeit. The courier was completely sure that the smell, texture, and color were different from real money. Moreover, he heard that the girl's family had gone bankrupt and decided that she was trying to deceive him. The girl did not justify herself to him and only asked if he would regret his refusal. But in response, Lee San only made an obscene gesture at her. Taking pity on her, he decided not to charge her for the call. But if they happened to meet at school next time, he warned her not to even dare to greet him. And now the realization came to him that all those bundles of money were real. Lee Sang was overcome with emotion. On the one hand, he wanted to go back and get the money back, but on the other, his pride prevented him from doing so. And now he couldn't even imagine whether he would ever have another chance to earn so much money. At that moment, a notification on his phone gave him hope. The cryptocurrency he invested in for a few days began to rise sharply in price. Literally, before our eyes, the number was constantly changing upwards, because there was. investment boom. As if going crazy, Lee San decided to go all in and invested all his money, dreaming of earning several times more than what he had just lost. At that very moment, the cryptocurrency growth curve fell downwards, as if into an abyss. This was the last straw for Lee San. The next moment, he literally destroyed the ATM booth. With one blow of his fist, he knocked the ATM out of her. The courier himself didn't even understand what had happened, but suddenly the handcuffs snapped on his hands. Another moment, and he is already sitting in the police station, answering questions under the gaze of a bright desk lamp. After questioning, the police officer said that Lee San could be released on the condition that he fully repay the damage within a week, since the bank had shown leniency towards him due to the fact that he was still a minor. According to the policeman, the courier was very lucky, but he didn't think so. Lee San held a check in his hand, judging by which he owed the bank almost 10 million won. Once he went outside, he no longer knew where to go. Lee San had no choice but to return to school in the morning. There were clear traces of worry and a sleepless night on his face, and in this state, he stood between that girl in the morning. He asked her for the opportunity to take back her words, but she only looked at him silently in response. The other guys couldn't understand what was going on. Among them was that fat new guy. He still dreamed of giving Lee Sang a good beating, since last time it all fell through. But now he has gathered the best who really know how to fight. Before he could finish his speech, Lee San's hand grabbed his face with all its strength. He threw the fat man aside with all his strength like a ball and continued his conversation with the girl. Falling to the ground in a very strange and uncomfortable position, the fat man shouted to his friends to take down the courier. One of the thugs grabbed Lee San by the shoulder, and then he will immediately receive a sharp blow from his hand in response. He tried to convince the girl that he just wanted to be careful with such a large sum. I continue to apply in the morning. He tried to convince her to agree on at least half the amount. The enemies flew around like projectiles, and the girl stood silently in the midst of this volley of fire, while Lee San persuaded her to give him 10 million in advance. Compromising all his principles, his hand reached out to the girl. He was ready to sign a contract with her, but she once again silently looked at the outstretched hand, and then she simply turned around to leave, leaving her interlocutor standing in a daze. Lee San tried to stop her in any way possible. Suddenly, the girl turned around and began to speak quietly. All this time, he spoke to her very arrogantly. His tone didn't sound like someone asking for a favor. The girl demanded he state his request properly. The involuntary witnesses of this dialogue could not understand what was happening between these two people. Now that they were in a client-contractor relationship, I couldn't overcome myself and conduct the conversation in a normal manner, so their cooperation was out of the question. Glancing towards her old offender, a thought occurred to her. So the first order was from Hyo Min-sop from high school. He wanted to be punished far more severely than anyone else. Lee San looked at her with clenched teeth, but at that moment the only thought in his head was about money. On this beautiful sunny day, the golf course was not crowded. The ball, like a tiny projectile, cut through the air against the backdrop of the azure sky. "Great shot, President!" the guards exclaimed, almost in unison, admiring the ball's flawless trajectory. That was a simply magnificent swing. The man with the golf club glanced at them sideways. Without turning around, he asked if he now looked like a kind person, but in response he heard a cold, "No." Taking out a cigarette, the man with the hockey stick philosophically mused out loud that the world was full of useless parasites who weren't worth the money they were paid. It was Ho Young-gan, the CEO of a large company. The silence on the golf course was broken by the ringing of his phone. Looking at the screen, he saw that it was a call from his beloved son. Ho Young-gan's face broke into a smile, and he pressed the answer button, and loudly and joyfully greeted his beloved offspring. But at the other end, through the sobs, he heard a barely audible, "Daddy?" The boy curled up into a ball like a cornered animal, and the sound of his teeth gnashing echoed in the silence of the restroom as he dreamed of killing the girl named Song Songha. Hearing this name, the father thought for a moment. Perhaps he was referring to the daughter of Song Gangchul, whom he himself was looking for. As if going crazy, The son told that it was she who set people on him, and then shaved a stripe on his head with a clipper. The photo of him standing there in such a shameful state has already spread across social networks. The guy was so ashamed that he started screaming and said in tears that he would never come to school again. The father silently listened to all of his son's worries, while a forgotten cigarette slowly smoldered in his hands. And then he hastened to reassure the boy, saying that he had nothing to worry about and that his dad would sort everything out. Ho Youngan, barely containing his emotions, repeated everything his son had told him. He stood in immaculate golf form, holding his club like a scepter of power, and around his feet, like fallen trophies, the gagged heads of his proven men jutted out of the ground, turning the course into an arena for his absolute dominance. They couldn't handle one girl, and they even dared to come to him for money and work? Ho Youngan stood for a second in perfect stance, the stick in his hand ready for a crushing blow. Suddenly, someone's ball flew at the guilty victim's head, knocking down Ho Youngan's target. But he didn't even glance at me, and not a single muscle on his concentrated face twitched. For the man in the blue overalls and helmet, golf turned out to be more difficult than he thought. For courier Baek Min-jun, beating people up was much easier and more fun. That's why Ho Youngan called him to his place. A whole suitcase of money was prepared for the courier, because the gentleman was counting on him. And for a job well done, he promised him a decent bonus. Baek Min-jun couldn't tear his gaze away from this wealth, hidden behind his aviator glasses. And then suddenly he burst out laughing. With a sharp movement of his hands, he slammed the suitcase shut, because he thought that no one made such orders now, because it was extremely obvious. All couriers like him received orders through the Heaven delivery app. The courier plucked up his courage, and without watching his language, began to say that now he understood why those idiots couldn't cope with even one girl. But the man who appeared behind him like a rock decided to leave him in his place, reminding him of where he was now. And at that very second, he found himself face down in the ground. With one movement of his hand, courier Baek Min-jun showed how uncomfortable he was when people touched him. All the guards ran away in fear, remembering the consequences of the meeting with Lee San. Hyo Young-gan confirmed that they had indeed screwed up, and now left the matter entirely in Baek Min-jun's hands. He wanted him to sort this matter out as soon as possible. There was also information that his target had hired a permanent courier, which also needed to be kept in mind. Min-jun stared at his victim with wide eyes. He asked Ho Young-gan for permission to deal with that courier at his own discretion. The client didn't mind, but on the condition that he clean up all traces. Hearing this, the courier happily accepted the order. A notification about the payment for the work was received on Lee San's phone. From that moment on, all delivery payments were processed through the app. The contract took effect from that moment and remained in effect until the work was completed. And during the period of the contract, he was prohibited from taking on other orders. And also, no matter what the situation, Lee San had to be next to Song Sung-ha. She even wanted him to swear to her about it, but he was in no hurry to do this, and a silent pause hung between them. Always being close to the client sounded quite ambiguous and embarrassing to him. Well, after thinking a little, he still decided to swear to it. Song-ha listened to his oath in silence, only glancing at him from under her brows. The next second, the phone rang, alerting Lee San to a new delivery. From that moment on, he was officially hired as a permanent courier. Having received the payment, Lee San was able to breathe a sigh of relief. With this payment, the principal debt was closed, but it was unclear what to do with the rent and food. He felt very awkward asking for more money, but there was nothing else he could do. Song Sung-ha did not respond to his request and turned around to walk in the other direction from the school. It turned out that she was going to work. It then dawned on Lee San that he would have to skip school, but he still needed a reward for perfect attendance. Song Sung-ha didn't answer him and went on looking for his motorcycle. Now the two of them were racing through the city streets, cutting through the cool morning air. Meanwhile, something completely different was happening in high school. In the semi-dark hall, the light snatched from the darkness the pale faces of the frightened schoolgirls and the ominous silhouette of their silent guards, whose intentions remained as dark as his mask. The man sitting in front of them, in a pensive pose, clearly expected some action from them. Looking up, he turned to one of his men and asked what he had told these guys that they were shaking so much. But he replied that he had been extremely polite with them and would continue eating his corn dog. The girls were assured that they came here of their own free will, and now they were standing there like pigs before a slaughterhouse. The man sitting in front of them once again addressed them haughtily, and I started to lose my temper and ordered them to undress because the cameras were already ready to film. And then he threatened that if the girls continued to ignore his words, he would have to use force. But suddenly, delivery courier Lee San appeared in the premises of the makeshift film studio. He was looking for a student named Son Jonsu, a 7th grader in his 3rd year at Tanjo High School. One of those present, playing the role of director, turned his questioning gaze to another and asked if he had ordered food. But suddenly he realized that the name on the order was his, and at that very second, a blow followed to his right cheekbone. Lee Sang quickly scattered all the villains around the studio like bowling pins, and in the end, he confirmed that the main one of them really had not made a mistake in his name. The remaining gang members decided to surrender without a fight. At this time, a girl entered the room. It was Song Songha. She checked whether the courier had done everything exactly as ordered. Lee San hurried to report and announced with a smile that the delivery had been completed quickly and accurately. The girl bent down and picked up the phone from Song Jones. She wanted to unlock the device using his face, but the camera didn't recognize his twisted grimace. Song Songha was not entirely happy with this outcome of events. She reminded the courier that this was precisely why she had asked him to leave it alone, if possible. He needed to act more professionally in the future. The girl asked Lee Sang to get some napkins from her bag so she could wipe away the blood. Taking advantage of the moment, the rest of the gang tried to escape, but they didn't have time to do this. Song Songa ordered them to name which schools they brought those girls from, and after that, a not very pleasant punishment awaited them. She ordered them to go to the corner and stand there on their knees with their hands raised, and if they let go, they could consider themselves dead. Hearing this, Lee San appreciated the girl's rather specific tastes, and he didn't even notice how he froze in place for a moment. But Song Songa quickly brought him to his senses. Let me remind you that today, they still need to visit many places. So they arrived at another high school. In one of the classrooms, a local authority figure sat in a stately manner, surrounded by beautiful girls, and he was very unhappy with the appearance of the uninvited courier. It was Jung Sung-gwan of the Kujong school, and suddenly a black-gloved hand dealt him a crushing blow to the jaw. After completing the delivery, the courier took a photo as a souvenir. Meanwhile, one of the students started running around the room in search of salvation. The only way out for him was to turn to the teacher. Having flown into the office, he started shouting that some psycho had burst in and started beating up the students. But suddenly, a hand in a black glove blocked his breathing. A courier in an orange jumpsuit dragged the boy out of the classroom, telling the teachers that they were just playing cops and robbers. The same fate befell Im Ganja and Somenjong High School, and then the Mad Dog, Kim Jong-jae, and Jindu High School. Lee Sang and Song Sunga did not ignore the spotter, Yoon Do-jun of Gengo High School. They also didn't forget the Dung Fly, Kodong-pal, and Daegu High School. Finally, they visited the ringleader and a student from Buncheon High School named Chu Chang-hoon. By evening, the courier's bag already contained a sufficient collection of mobile phones. Song Songa looked over the trophies and slammed the lid of her bag shut. Today was their last delivery, but it was shaping up to be the most challenging of the day. Lee San silently glanced sideways at his client, and then he dryly asked if they were definitely on the same team. The girl looked at her courier with confusion. Lee Sang felt there was no interaction between them, even though they were bound by a mutually beneficial agreement. He wanted to at least understand their common goal. Songha suddenly placed her hand on her helmet, and then she dryly announced that they were not a team or partners, but a client and a courier. Their relationship was limited solely by money. Each of them could terminate the contract and leave at any moment. That's why Song Songa wasn't going to tell him anything. To her, he was just a hired force. The only thing she decided to tell him was why she was collecting the phones. It turned out that one of them was supposed to contain the contact she was looking for. Her goal was to bring Lee San to this man. As soon as she spoke, a large truck appeared behind her, as if it had come out of nowhere. Lee San rushed forward like a projectile and with crushing force pushed the girl out of the trajectory of the iron monster rushing towards them, managing to get ahead of the inexorable roar of the engine in a split second. They both fell on the asphalt, but survived. Lee Sang checked with Song Sung-ha to see if she was okay, but she sharply pulled his hand away from her. Rising above the ground, she saw with horror the consequences of the collision, and this picture awakened a lot of negative emotions in her. Meanwhile, Lee San lay there and realized that he wasn't feeling very well. Moreover, he still had 28 months left to pay off the broken motorcycle. The truck passenger was sure he had found those who stole his phone and beat him. He was very angry that the courier driving that car was unable to hit either of those two, even though I called myself a professional. The man behind the wheel of the truck narrowed his eyes, smiled slightly, and said that he simply hadn't had any orders in these parts for a long time, so he was a little out of shape. He got out of the cabin and asked the passenger to stay inside. Approaching the body, he opened the heavy door bolt with a habitual movement. There were a bunch of different boxes inside the truck. After examining the contents of the courier bag, Song Sung-ha saw that, unfortunately, all the phones were broken. This turn of events certainly did not suit her, and on top of everything else, she saw one more detail. It turned out that they were hit by a car from the Godu courier service. Song Sung-ha warned Lee San to be extremely careful, as it was an unusual courier company. Lee San approached the open body of the truck and called out to the courier sitting inside. He was furious and demanded that he pay him for the broken motorcycle if he didn't want to go to the next world. But the man didn't react to his words and didn't even turn around. He carefully examined the boxes looking for something, and then a fleeting smile crossed his face. He finally chose the tool for today's work. Lee Song tried to control his emotions and explained that his motorcycle was custom-made and the only one in the world, and only 2 months had passed since the purchase. But emotions got the better of him, and he threatened to charge her for moral damages as well. Suddenly, the courier in the back of the truck grabbed a machete with a long handle from the box, and without spinning it around himself, he cut off the top of the truck. He was overjoyed, because he hadn't held this thing in his hands for so long and was afraid that he might lose his grip. Lee San only survived because the blow missed him. If he continues to show off like this, he won't work in this service for long. Enraged, Lee San punched the asphalt, leaving a large dent in it. He was ready to wipe the enemy off the face of the earth. The courier from another delivery service chuckled maliciously, saying that they understand how young blood boils. He had seen many times such young people who could not contain their ardor and went to the next world. Lee San shouted at him to kill again. It had been a while since he'd fought someone with a long weapon, so he misjudged the distance. Next time, he should have blocked it well. The truck courier was very surprised, but accepted the challenge. Swinging again, he reminded the enemy that he had warned him of imminent death. But this boy still challenged him. Lee San gathered all his iron might into his fist, and he put up a powerful block against the cold weapon, the handle of which shattered into pieces. Seeing this epic moment, the courier was completely perplexed. This time, Lee San calculated everything correctly, proving his superiority. Now he knew for sure that he had gotten the hang of it. Lee San was confident that he could repel any attack from his opponent. The courier from the truck looked at this young guy with amazement. It was as if he saw himself in his youth in it. He also staked his life on reckless youth alone, flying headfirst into the dirt and swinging his fists at random. And now, looking back, I didn't understand when I lived at my age. His foot landed confidently on the edge of the truck. When the weapons were collected, the courier called out to his passenger and invited him to help, but he didn't react in any way, and the courier looked back at him. It was clear that his passenger was very scared. He hid like a mouse. Then the guy suddenly emerged from behind the seat and started yelling in a voice that wasn't his own, saying that he was a client and wasn't obligated to help him, especially since he had paid money for it. But a sharp blow from the courier's weapon brought him back to his senses. The courier calmly asked if he had ever worked there, but received a negative answer, and the clarification that the guy was rather spoiled. The courier read that a normal young man with arms and legs should work part-time, and that modern parents are simply overprotective of their children. The guy felt uneasy, sweat pouring down his face. The courier asked if he knew how to load and unload. Suddenly, in the midst of the city bustle, Like a bolt from the blue, a piercing cry from Song Songa was heard. She reminded Lee Sang to work now. After all, she had already warned him to behave like a professional. The girl was about to give him advice on how to behave in a fight, but she pulled her away. And he reminded him that fighting is his territory. Song Songha didn't dare teach him how to fight. Hearing him speak insolently to the girl, the courier from the truck already threw his new weapon at him. But Lee San, with the same iron confidence, left him, putting up an iron block. At that moment, a new projectile was already flying towards the guy. He tried to hit him with his weapon again and again. The courier stopped from the truck for a second and examined the projectile. It turned out that he had already been defeated. It seemed that the enemy really wanted to recapture every single one of them. Lee San was like a true warrior whose goal was to protect at any cost. His helmet was broken and he was already very tired, but he still held on. The courier shouted at his passenger to keep throwing shells, but here I was already exhausted without habit and could not raise my hands. The courier was not happy with this situation, and he stopped cutting off the guy's arms and legs if he hesitated. It was a worthy motivation, and the boxes flew forward faster than before. The courier kept putting more and more projectiles on the long handle, but Lee San was not going to give up. His fists were like steel. They smashed everything in their path. The courier from the truck was taken aback by this turn of events. He had no choice but to start throwing new weapons at him again. He swung with all his might, trying to inflict some damage on his opponent. But Lee San, as if not noticing his fatigue, crushed everything that approached him. His gaze was impossibly calm. This frightened the courier even more than his iron fists. He again put a new projectile on the handle. A log with metal spikes sticking out from all sides flew at Lee San's head. He then smashed it into pieces with one blow. Here came the new box of weapons. More and more. The courier from the truck threw everything in his path like a madman. But Lee San could repel, it seemed, any barrage of attack. The courier in the truck stepped into some kind of box. There was already madness in his eyes. He launched the next projectile without even taking his foot out of the box, like a soccer ball. But Lee San intercepted the huge metal star and pinned it to the asphalt with one blow. The courier had to work hard to pull out the next show. A huge log emerged from the box, and he, as if mad, lifted it above himself, and the half-ton colossus flew upward. When it reached Lee San's fist, it was like a collision of celestial bodies. The projectile handle couldn't withstand the load and broke, and the log itself flew far back, like a real projectile. The courier stood and silently looked at his opponent, while beads of sweat ran down his cheeks. The guy who hired him finally breathed a sigh of relief as he was able to move all the boxes. Lee San calmly told the courier that he had paid for the broken helmet, but he will still have to pay for the motorcycle. After all, in this work, the first to die is the one who acts recklessly, and past memories surfaced in the courier's memory. 30 years ago, Kim Taek-soo was still very young and thought he could handle everything on his own. His partner advised him to follow the established plan. If he continued to push forward recklessly, he could lose his life. After all, the man standing before them was dangerous even without backup. He was a security officer on the payroll of a major company. It sounded quite threatening, but he was just a mutt who ran on the orders of the old men, and only fools without skills had to fear recklessness. Kim Taek-soo clearly remembered being the only one left alive that day, kneeling before that crazy man. Although he did agree with him about the statement about recklessness, but Kim almost went crazy at that moment. His body was shaking as if he had been electrocuted. The guy there was also tired of his elders telling him not to act recklessly. It was funny that all the elders who said that were already dead, and he killed some of them himself. He left Kim Taek-soo alive only because for the first time in a long time, he met a person with whom he was interested in talking. He conspiratorially suggested that he continue to live his life just as recklessly in order to prove to everyone that they were wrong. After that day, Kim changed his approach and stopped being an idiot who just rushes forward with his bare hands. He left the battlefield completely and lived huddled in a corner. He lived in fear that one day he might meet such a bastard again. Kim had been desperately avoiding this for 30 years. I couldn't even imagine that I would be able to meet him in such a place. He decided he just needed to run. After all, if he continues to deal with this monster, he simply might not be able to cope. After all, everything that was happening was already complete recklessness. Lee-san calmly watched his opponent tremble with fear. But Kim Taek-soo didn't want to live like this anymore. After all, this was a life in which he tucked his tail between his legs, barely made ends meet, and simply grew old. If he runs away again now, he will live like a rat for the rest of his life. But he didn't want that anymore. Because in the old days, swinging his fists was no worse than his opponent. Now Lee-san liked what he saw in front of him. Now this courier had a chance to feel the power of his fists. This feeling did not take long to come. From the blow, Kim Taek-soo's teeth fell out of his mouth like toys, and he himself flew high into the sky, performing a double somersault. Now he didn't owe Lee-san anything for the motorcycle either. After all, he was supposed to receive billions soon anyway, so he simply decided to turn a blind eye to it. But then suddenly, that same truck passenger made his presence known. Lee-san turned around and saw a rather unpleasant picture in front of him. He took Song Song-ha hostage and held a knife to her throat. His area was literally millimeters away from her neck. The crazy-eyed guy demanded his phone back. Having lost his vigilance a little, he did not notice how the girl's hand was already ready to grab his hand. The next moment he received a powerful blow from the elbow, and then followed the potion of blows, a lot. The villain fell down, writhing in pain, and Song Song-ha looked at him with disdain. Lee-san didn't expect such skill from her, and the girl could really stand up for herself. In a one-on-one fight, she could easily defeat a fat guy like this. The car with its top cut off stood alone in the middle of the street. Lee-san silently stepped over the hooligan lying on the ground. He even thought that the situation had become a little dangerous. But Song Song-ha herself moved quite well, and could even possibly walk and knock everyone down on her own. The girl stood silently, her head slightly lowered. There were a dozen broken phones lying at her feet. Lee-san glanced at her again, waiting for some kind of reaction. He tried to defuse the situation and began explaining that while working as a courier, he had witnessed all sorts of unpleasant things, and there was no one to blame for another courier hitting his bike. He also wanted to clarify the situation regarding their work together. His job was to fight, not to guard things. Suddenly, Song Song-ha silently took his hand in hers. Lee-san was even a little taken aback by this, but she continued to carefully examine his gloved hand. And suddenly she asked if everything was okay with him. Lee-san didn't even know what to say to her, and an awkward pause fell between them again. A blush appeared on his cheeks, and he replied haltingly that she shouldn't worry about him. Realizing the awkwardness of the situation, Song Song-ha quietly whispered that he was just an idiot. Grabbing him by the chest, the onanist started yelling at him, trying to explain that if something happened to him, the contract between them would be terminated because he would no longer be able to make deliveries. This was her last warning. If he dared to do anything stupid again, the contract would definitely be terminated. Suddenly, their loud argument was interrupted by someone's laughter. Lying on the asphalt, Kim Taek-soo talked about his youth and advised the girl not to be so strict with her boyfriend, because he was really cool. He himself was sincerely grateful to Oi-san for rekindling in him the spirit of delivery that he had long forgotten. Even though these two were indeed strong, they could definitely use the wisdom and experience of their elder. But Lee-san didn't want anything from this man who was beaten like a dog. He even refused to help him get up into the land. Since the motorcycle was broken, they had to walk to the next delivery address. But as soon as they took a few steps, Kim's voice was heard again behind them, and he suddenly said that the two of them would die. He knew for sure that their names were already on the priority delivery list. But Lee-san didn't understand what they were talking about. Suddenly, Song Song-ha became noticeably nervous, saying that she didn't expect it all to happen so quickly, which meant there was no time to come up with a new plan. It seemed that only Lee-san didn't understand the essence of what was happening. Kim Taek-soo even doubted whether he really worked in delivery. With priority delivery, all couriers could accept an order at the same time, but only the courier who completed the order first received the cost. Getting on the priority delivery list meant becoming a common goal for all couriers, and 24 hours a day they will rush to this order to kill their targets. Lee-san didn't expect to become such a target, but for him, it was the best thing that could have happened to him. After all, now he didn't have to look for fights himself. These people would come to him themselves, and he would be able to earn good money. Seeing his reaction, Kim Taek-soo once again noted that this guy was simply his idol and even offered to work with him as partners. But Lee San wasn't even going to agree to that. However, he had already interfered with Song Song-a's plans, so now he definitely had no chance of becoming a partner. Kim Taek-soo was a professional courier and simply made deliveries for money. Suddenly, a dog collar fell to the ground next to him with a clang. They definitely couldn't become partners. But if he is ready to become a dog, then Song Song-a is ready to take him in. Kim Taek-soo looked at the collar lying next to him in surprise and even a little fear. After all, if he were a little younger, he certainly wouldn't have hidden his feelings from this girl. Lee San listened to the conversation between the two with disgust. They had one last delivery point left, and since they were in priority delivery, they had very little time left. And at that moment, the collar suddenly fell on the neck of the nearest hooligan on the ground. Song Song-ha decided to use him for her own purposes. Her eyes were filled with anger. She wanted at all costs to find out from him what data was recorded in their phones. He understood that he wouldn't get away with it, so my girlfriend decided to force him to tell the whole truth. The fiery rays of the setting sun illuminated the skyscrapers of the metropolis. Lee San arrived at his last point for the day. Song Song-ha reminded that this will most likely be the most difficult delivery, and suddenly they realized that this was their school. Lee San asked why they couldn't have come to this address at the very beginning, because that would have ruined his perfect attendance record. But Song Song-ha explained that they had done the right thing by not making a noise in the school while there were students there. Kim Taek-soo reported that he had tied the prisoner up tightly. Now this Chebarashka definitely wouldn't be able to escape. Kim asked what else he could do for her, and Song Song-ha said that the only thing he could do was die for her when her time came. Nowadays, the 30-year age difference was not so big, so Kim Taek-soo asked the girl to call him brother. Entering the school premises, Lee San smelled blood and dust. It seemed like there had been a serious fight here before they arrived. Song Song-ha knew for sure that he was right in his suspicions. The courier's motorcycle was parked next to the school gates. Their destination was the student council room on the 5th floor. This window was always covered with blackout curtains, but until recently it was open and the light was on. It is possible that someone acted first to prevent delivery from being completed, or they are the target now. But suddenly, in the darkness of the school corridor, someone's voice was heard, which said that perhaps both options were correct. He had been waiting for them for a long time, so everyone who was in the room with the student council was already dead. Since this courier got tired of waiting for so long, he walked around the school and killed everyone he met along the way. Everyone looked at this man in bewilderment. It seems there was another person here who really irritated him. Kim Taek-soo recognized the man and remembered that he was called a talentless person because he always ignored the basic rules of couriers. But suddenly the hand of the courier, Baek Min-jun, hit Kim's hand. The last one's hand flew off to the side from the strong blow. The courier asked him not to poke him in the exchange. At that moment, Kim realized that part of his arm had been cut off by a saw. The courier was no longer interested in preying on weaklings and ordered Kim to get lost. At first, he thought they were trying to piss him off by calling him here to catch some high school girl. But then he took a closer look at the photo of his target, and he was incredibly happy to notice one important detail there. His main target was Song Song-ha, but in the photograph next to her, he saw the familiar face of Lee Sang. They hadn't seen each other for so long, and this meeting was very joyful for him. After all, Lee San was his childhood friend. Baek Min-jun waited for some kind of reaction from his friend, but Lee San stood silently, looking at him from under his brows. Song Song-ha looked suspiciously at her regular courier. She couldn't even imagine that he had such friends. This news was very unexpected for her. Lee San tried to justify himself somehow, and began to say that he was not exactly his friend. But at that moment, the hand of the courier in the blue jumpsuit was at Song Song-a's throat. But Lee San managed to intercept it with a quick movement. The girl looked at this silent scene with incomprehension. Baek Min-jun asked why he was protecting her. Lee Sang dryly explained that she was his client. Well, since he needed him specifically, Lee San asked not to touch Song Sun-ha. The courier, looking like a dung fly, was taken aback for a second, and then his face twisted into a smile that looked like a terrible grimace, and he called his request Complete nonsense. Li San used his iron fists. The courier couldn't even imagine that he would stand up for her so vehemently. But Li San had to protect his client at any cost. His gaze never left Baek Min-jun for a split second. He moved with lightning speed, and his hand was once again in close proximity to the girl's throat. This time he was so close that he was able to injure her. Blood spurted from her neck. Smiling slyly, the courier asked San if he had forgotten one important detail. He wanted to remind him who they really were. There was one terrible reminder in his mad gaze. He asked Li San who he had sworn to protect until now, but his ridiculous strength did not go away. Baek Min-jun had one virtue. He had the advantage in speed and technique, but they have never tested which of them will win one-on-one. The courier in the blue overalls kept wondering where his childhood friend had disappeared to, but it turned out he was pretending to be a happy schoolboy. He decided that he had somehow softened during this time, and such a life clearly did not suit him, and he invited Li San to return. Watching this conversation, Song Song-ha ran her hand over her neck. Her hand turned burgundy, and the smell of blood hit her nose. Her eyes seemed to be filled with terrible rage. She took a step towards the courier, and with a sharp movement of her body, she hit him in the chest. He didn't understand what she was trying to do. Li San didn't take his eyes off them. Baek Min-jun even tried to joke that the girl was trying to seduce him, but Song Song-ha could not forgive him for calling her a burden in one of their conversations. She asked to repeat this word again. He watched in bewilderment as she licked the blood from her fingers. Song Song-ha got blood on both of her thumbs, and then with a quick movement of her hands, she rubbed the blood across the courier's glasses. In doing so, she momentarily deprived him of the ability to see. At that moment, her arms wrapped around him in a death grip, and the next moment Li San's iron fist struck the courier in the face. Li San appreciated his client's unexpected move, but it was natural, because she wasn't some kind of burden. Li San grabbed the courier by the chest and began shaking him, and they answered in unison that they were not dating. At this time, Kim tried to stop the bleeding from his severed hand. He was holding on with all his might. Suddenly, Li San called out to him. He advised Kim to pick up his wrist, since it might still be possible to sew it on. But at first, he didn't even understand what he meant. But Li San knew exactly one place where he could get help. Suddenly, he saw that Song Song-ha was about to leave somewhere. If she wanted to find another working phone, it was already too late. Baek Min-jun may have appeared to be a slob, but he was actually very meticulous. The witnesses' phones were probably already smashed. Besides, he always left a complete mess behind. Song Song-ha asked him not to interfere where he shouldn't. Li San was unhappy that she still behaved this way, even though he was worried about her. Suddenly, she pointed her finger at the courier. Remembering that, he called himself Li San's friend. At that moment, Li San's face twisted into a grimace of displeasure, and he once again said that he was not his friend. He considered him more of a stalker. Well, the courier really didn't like such an offensive nickname. They had simply crossed paths a few times at their previous job, and he was constantly following Li San around or getting into fights. But he really believed that this was true friendship. Li San got tired of hearing this and suggested knocking him out again, but the courier thought his friend was in deep trouble. After all, Li San didn't understand who he was dealing with. His client stood at the very top of the power hierarchy in Korea. She was the daughter of Song Kyung-chol, but this name meant nothing to Li Sang. In any case, she was beyond his capabilities. The courier advised Li Sang to go to Song Cheng-dong and find Chong-gon. Then perhaps his client will be able to find out who killed her father. He read that this information helped his friend a lot. But at that moment, a backpack fell with all its force in his face. It was Song Song-ha who, in a rage, began to beat him so that he would not throw around her father's name so easily. She demanded that he tell her everything he knew before she actually killed him, but he wasn't going to tell her anything else. The girl wanted to strike again, but Li San's hand stopped her. He asked her to stop. With eyes full of hatred, she looked at her courier, thinking that he was really trying to protect his childhood friend, but Li San just knew that he really wouldn't say anything else, because that's how he was raised. And no matter how much the girl beats him, it still won't lead to anything, and they really had better think about where to go next. But Song Song-ha walked past, deliberately hitting Li San with her shoulder. She really was a restless girl. The scarlet flower street of Songjiangdong was filled with bright lantern lights. The phone on the table rang, notifying the hostess of a new delivery. A woman's hand with rings and a manicure clicked to read the notification details. She brought her phone closer to her face, and opening the screen to full volume, she loudly announced that they had a new order. One of the girls looked useful, so she had to be delivered without the slightest scratch, and she ordered the guy to be torn to pieces and thrown to the dogs. But the main rule was to do everything beautifully.